Nick Saban did his weekly spot on the Pat McAfee Show, for which he apparently receives quite a healthy stipend, according to reports.
Brother, you know that you think Nick Saban would be doing a weekly segment in the middle of college football season if he wasn't getting paid an egregious amount of money for it? He ain't doing it for the love of the game. I know he does love the game. But that man, that man's pocketbook is lined.
That's right there next to the Aflac commercials for line item in Nick Saban's W-2 form over the year. That's his tax return. We got McAfee Bank, we got Aflac Bank, and then we got whatever Alabama's paying him, some ungodly sum of money. That man's doing okay over the course of the season. Anyway, Nick Saban started giving his talk, his take on analytics. We got a couple of clips that we want to play so we can talk about it. Let's hit the first one because this is the easiest one to start off with.
And they talk about analytics, saying that you got this percentage chance to make it on this down and distance on fourth down, so it's worth going for it. But what the analytics really don't tell you is what happens when you don't make it.
Well.
So those consequences are pretty significant, sometimes too, especially when you don't take field position into account. But that would be something that we could have a conversation about.
So I'm interested in this because it sort of shows the classic old school attitude of, establishment versus analytics. And it's always couched in the negative framework of like what happens if we don't get it, right? But the other thing is, he says it doesn't even take into account field position. Of course it takes into account field position. What are you talking about? Every single analytics model in the world is taking into account field position. Nobody is using a number that simply says, well, they say the chances of converting on fourth down is like 60%, so go for every fourth down. I mean, of course the numbers say go for it. Literally nobody is saying that, right? That is madness. And somebody of Nick Saban's stature cannot not know that. Like, it's an egregious and ridiculous thing to be saying. And the number of times you hear these people talk about, well, the analytics doesn't say this, and this. And almost universally, the analytics, the models absolutely factor those things in, because not factoring them in, which is the point they're making, would be idiotic.
I agree with you completely. And I honestly believe that the negative stigma that comes around analytics stems from coaches thinking that somebody's like coming for their job.
Yes.
And that's not what what we're trying. Like, analytics doesn't necessarily. I don't think. I'm trying to like organize my thoughts here. Coaches believe that if you're using analytics, then it's like not how football was like meant to be played, and it's not the case. It's always supposed to be supplemented. This is simply supposed to help you. Like, we are helping you make better decisions. That's all it is. It's like a decision-making thing. It's also not 100% guaranteed.
Right.
You're just taking a lot of things into account. And so every time we hear comments like this, and I hate criticizing a coach like Saban, who is clearly one of the greatest, if not the greatest coach of all time for what he has done in this dynasty that he's had at Alabama. So it's not like we're saying that we're better coaches than Nick Saban, or that we could build a program better than him, or anything like that. We're simply saying that the overarching umbrella term of analytics has gotten such a negative stigma from so many different coaches, and it's just not that. It's just they're viewing it in the wrong light.
Right.
Analytics don't exist to make you feel like you're wrong all the time. In fact, like, it's supposed to be the opposite. Analytics exists so you make better decisions more often. Like, that's the whole point. And it has become this combative term. And it's not supposed to be that. Oh, analytics, it doesn't tell you what field position there is, or what personnel there is, or what happens if you don't get it. Yes, it does. That's the whole point of the win probability part of the column that you would look at when you have a guy who makes a decision for you on the sideline that kind of says to you, hey, if we don't get this and it ends up being this down and distance, this is what it should be. These are the percentages. This is what it's looked like for us. Like I think coaches believe it's just success rate. And success rate goes into it, obviously, but it's not just success rate. It's also game script and game flow and win percentage if you get it versus if you don't, and what becomes a worthwhile risk to take. It's just it's unfortunately another example of the negative view around analytics, and social media, like many things in the world, makes this worse, because I think people look at analytics and people then just use decision-making analytics and they try to call coaches awful coaches and things like that. And there's just so many more things go into it, but that's another rant for another day. Ultimately, yes, I agree with you completely. Analytics does take into account what happens if you don't get it, or the field position and things like that. And it just kind of sucks that a coach as prominent as Nick Saban, whether he wants to use it or not, believes that and voices that.
The funny thing is, the funny thing is, it's classic, it's disingenuous, and it's classic misdirection, because he goes out here and he paints this boogeyman analytics says this and it can't take it. Now, number one, he probably knows that's not true, right? Because he's using analytics, right? Even if he doesn't want to admit it. This was remember when Bill Belichick for years would bang on about analytics being a waste of time. Meanwhile, they're running the most sophisticated analytics department in the NFL with Ernie, in the booth on his own. They were doing all of this stuff, and he would publicly dump on it because he knew he had a better system than most people. So I'm sure Saban uses this stuff. And the way I know he does is because literally 30 seconds later in that clip, he's talking about how a turnover, he's basically equating missing on fourth down, right? Not converting, and therefore turning the ball over on downs. He's equating that with an actual turnover, and he's saying if you run the numbers, a turnover is worth 3.5 points, right? Well, how do you know that, Nick? Was it analytics by any chance? You can't crap on it when you don't want to listen to what it says and then use it over here to make your point.
But a lot of coaches do.
Yes.
A lot of coaches do. And that is, again, I think that you are so correct in saying that it's a misdirection kind of a thing. And whether it's an on purpose, which, look, Saban is a brilliant football mind. So perhaps he is doing what Belichick is doing, where they have all these analytics, but he knows that he has so much power that if he says the analytics are garbage, then maybe other people will not use it as much as he does. But that's all it is, man. That's all these things are. It's just enhanced, contextualized data to help you make better decisions. That's all it is. It's not a guarantee. It's not it is simply a tool that you use to help coach better in situational football. And what will coaches will tell, it is funny because coaches will tell you this all the time. They will say, of the 130 snaps that there are in a football game, basically the game comes down to 4 or 5 plays, right? 4 or 5 plays that you can point to that said, this made all the difference in the world when it came to what the score was at the end of the game. They'll tell you it's 4 or 5 plays. Why would you not want to have all of the information that you possibly could have to make the smartest decision in those 4 or 5 plays that make the difference for you? That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's not the only way that analytics is coming for your job is if there is somebody who uses them more open-mindedly, who then makes better decisions, who then gets better results than you. And that's the only way analytics is coming after these coaches' jobs.
And this is the thing. This is now how analytics is affecting these guys. And we have another clip. So they finished up talking to Saban, and Chuck Pagano was on the show, and Chuck Pagano gave his little take on it. So let's run the second clip, because I think this is pretty illuminating.
Do you see the graphics now even on the games? So instead of the team name at the bottom, if one team's playing another, they'll just run a graphic that says ESPN analytics say 4th and 6 or less, go.
Yep.
Or whatever.
Every time Joe
it's
Buck,
on there.
and Joe Buck chimes in and says, analytics says right here, because you're over the 50-yard lane, anything up to 4th and 6, you go.
Tonight, Amazon uses it too.
And so if it doesn't work, then they're throwing that at you after the fact. This is what it says.
Everybody on Earth knows that one particular AI says this is 67%er.
Yeah.
AJ, think about
some of it's good, but
think about that, AJ. Though that is a real thing to even think about there because he just mentioned Carly, Jim, Pete. Okay, so that's president of the Colts, owner of the Colts, next owner of the Colts. Okay, so that's 3 generations.
And she's down there.
She's on the sideline with these numbers in there. You could see how some coaches will just want to take the feel out of it because then they can cover their own ass.
So analytics are now being like weaponized against these guys that don't use them because everybody else has them now. So it's actually the way that that coaches are now being pushed into using analytics is the fear that, well, the owner is being given this stuff, the president is being given this stuff, the GM is being given this stuff. If I'm going against the analytics, I better have a good reason for it. And honestly, I think that's a good thing because we should have a good reason for going against the numbers. It's not that the numbers are infallible because we're talking about these things that steal win percentage points, right? As everybody points out, they're not saying it's 100% you're going to hit this thing. They're not even saying it's like an 80% you're going to hit this thing. They're saying if you do this and you make the right call 1,000 times, you're going to steal, 3 plays, 5 plays, whatever it is. You're going to get an edge slightly over the people that aren't doing it that way. And over a long period of time, you win. And that's easier to prove if you're playing poker, right? And you're playing thousands of hands in a night. It's harder to prove if you're playing football where there's 100 snaps in a game, maybe, on your side of the ball, and small sample sizes and bad beats can go against you easily. But like coaches look at this from the what could go wrong point of view, and everybody else is looking at this from the point of view of what is the optimal strategy,
right?
Only adjust when necessary.